Uh, all right, so I hit the recording while I'm thinking about it. Yeah, like the AI is such a weird slippery slope. Like with the striking now, I sort of get that. So,
Well, there's a lot of people that are under somewhat of a false misconception that the strike was about AI, or that even that it had like a majority aspect of it. If anything, AI was kind of tacked on because they were already going to strike over wages and streaming and stuff.
right,
And
yeah,
and the justification for the AI that they were trying to bake into the contracts, it was based not necessarily in reality, so it was very easy to dismiss on like technicalities, but also the movie execs that are ultimately the ones that are going to decide when the strike ends or where the give's going to be. They looked at that and they were just like, yeah, no, like we're going to be using AI. That they absolutely did not commit to a single thing that would inhibit the use of AI going forward.
mm.
So even if it was a sticking point, it's already off the table, and now they're just kind of focused on wages, I think,
No, I when I looked,
royalties specifically.
yeah, I looked at the stuff. I was like, oh, all of these grievances are pretty much the reasons why I went to Japan to get a permanent job instead of staying in America.
It's weird, man. I just talked with my friend Eddie Synchronous last night, who also has worked at Disney. Believe it or not, he went to Cal Arts for 4 years, and he actually, I guess, brushed elbows and had a little bit of mentorship from some of the old guard, the nine old men, because he was there during the mid to late 90s,
Hmm.
during like that whole transition. So, but he was kind of explaining a very similar situation.
Yeah, I mean, gig economy, being, like I used to do jobs where I'd be like, oh, there's one day overlap between your old job and your new job, so you can't do the next one, And I'm like, oh, that's totally what these guys are complaining about. So not for this one, partly because it's anime, but I did decide to do a for the next month. I am recording like let's say strike supporting podcast. So the Twilight Zone one, I'm going to do episodes of One Step Beyond from the 50s, which I mean, for me, that's like fun. That's kind of a fun way to change things up for a bit, right? And then the Films and Filth one, we're just choosing non-Hollywood films for a month or public domain. So we're doing Plan 9 from Outer Space, Zoo, Warriors from the Mystic Mountain, Shin Godzilla, a couple Buster Keaton films, and the first Pokemon movie. I'm like, I'm excited about doing all of those
Can you explain how Buster Keaton would not be a Hollywood movie?
because it's public domain. You can just watch it on YouTube. And
Okay. I mean,
actually,
technically,
those,
it's still Hollywood, though, isn't it?
yeah, 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 it is, but it's public domain. And actually, he was given. This is weird. Like the guy, his producer,
It's all
basically.
public domain if you sail the seas.
Yeah, that's true. No, his producer was like, "Here, I'll make a production company for you, Buster Keaton Productions, which he made most of his films under, technically independently. But it's like he didn't own it or anything. He wasn't actually like the boss. It's just so that's why one of the reasons why he made about 5 films at full speed and then had to go like let MGM break him or whatever. So because he did not actually own that company. So, but hell,
It
that
was the
there's
shadow people. The
yeah,
shadow
there's
people owned it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I maybe I was mentioning it to you or somebody else, but one of my favorite movie scenes ever is the Mulholland Drive scene where they replace the pop idol singer. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Mulholland Drive movie,
Yeah,
the David Lynch, right?
that's right. Do you know the scene I'm talking about?
It's been a little while. You'd have to re-explain it to
I,
me. Do you got the
uh,
visuals? Can you paint the picture?
yeah, it's a lady singing reasonably well in a recording studio or whatever, like a girl group hit, and then one of the suits comes in and says, "Get rid of her. This is the girl you're going to use." And they bring in like she looks like an MK Ultra robot or whatever, and just she starts wildly gyrating and singing the song and stuff. And yeah, it's just
Have you
like
seen? I think it's called Beneath the Silver Lake or Under the Silver Lake. Have you
no,
seen
I
that one
don't
yet?
I don't think I have.
You should absolutely watch that movie for sure. It's right up that same kind of alley, but I think a little bit better done too.
Yeah, one of the
No,
reasons I
no
like
shade
that.
at David Lynch,
No,
but
no. One of the reasons I like that though is that's not what Mulholland Drive. Well, it's kind of about that, but it's just this one little encapsulated scene of David Lynch kind of like I think being like, "Hey, folks, this is how it really works." It's
little
like no,
glimpses. I mean, and yeah, it's like an embedded story, which I have a lot of respect for. But I still can't understand the little miniature homeless guy at the very end of the movie.
Oh yeah, there's so many weird things of I mean, I actually like that one quite a bit. It helps. That's one where it does help to read people's breakdowns of it and like maybe how the story kind of fits together. Like Lost Highway. I also like Lost Highway, but Lost Highway really does seem to pretty much be a mess. You know, a
I
very
tried to
interesting
watch that one
mess.
recently, actually. I kind of had it on, and every once in a while, the movie that I've got on might distract me enough where I'll start paying attention to it instead of just kind of being background. And that one just, it was even worse than that because not only did it grab my attention, I was just like, man, there's probably something better than this that I can put on for background. So I don't know if it feels like a movie that commands your attention, and even if you give it your attention, you have to really lead into it and already be kind of digging it. Like I don't know if you don't like it within the first half hour, it doesn't seem like it explodes at any point.
I think you do get the telephone scene in the first half hour, which is the best one of that. You know,
Right.
call me at your house. I'm there now with Robert Blake.
It's got an awesome cast in it.
Yeah, yeah. Let me dredge up my notes here. Dredge is such a
I gotta say,
harsh
I'm
word for that.
super excited about this one in particular.
Oh, same here. I like I said, I was almost. I mean, I'm glad we did the brave little toaster and all that, but yeah, I was like, oh, we're not doing Roger Rabbit quite yet. So, let's do Roger Rabbit then. Hello, welcome to the Occult Disney podcast, where we dive into all the secret magic behind the mouse. This is Matt here. Joining me today, as always, is Thomas, the paranoid American.
Mwahaha.
You're turning the paranoia on everyone else now. Is that what
I
it
was gonna
is?
try to do the Mickey one, but it would be embarrassing unless I practiced it.
Wahaha!
Yeah,
No.
there you go. That's better than I can do.
What was I having to do yesterday? Oh, I did Return of the Jedi, and we usually do story summaries, but I was like, why don't I just read the prologue, like the screen crawl? And they're like, do it in a George Lucas voice. I got to do my George Lucas, so it was fun. I,
I've never been great at voice impressions, so it fascinates me when someone's really good at it.
I don't know if I'm really good at it, but uh just while I'm plugging my own podcast in the Twilight Zone one, I make my guests do the Rod Serling introductions. And then there was something where I think we were going to do the closing. I said, I'll try doing it. And I couldn't do the impression at all. So, I ask someone else to do it every week, don't I? I was thinking at the breakfast table of doing this one in a Roger Rabbit voice the entire time, but that would people would turn this off within 5 minutes in that case. Not
You
because
can
of the
always put
movie
it
or
to the
anything.
test. Let's
No,
see.
no, no. I don't want to do that. Also, I didn't practice my Roger Rabbit. When I did the George Lucas one, I spent the 5 minutes waiting on Zoom, like watching 80s George Lucas interviews and like trying to match it. So,
It's funny because if you really try, if you're not a professional at doing it and you try to talk outside of your normal voice, you'll just kind of have fatigue immediately. And the longer you try to do it, the more fatigue that you'll start to kind of have. Like you'll actually start stressing your vocal cords and the muscles because you got to shape them in ways that you haven't trained yourself to do it naturally. So it like on one aspect, it's really hard to do because of that. But then on the other one, it's like people that are good at it, you kind of have to know that they practice it a lot. Like they're always talking in different voices and like shifting it around.
well, that makes me sound doubly insane because sometimes I'll get
It
stuck
does.
in voices. Like if I start talking like the Southern madman, I'll just start doing this all day. Yeah, which that'll happen sometimes. And I remember when I was once I taught at a place where you're like we'd get on boats and look for whales. So especially when we were on the schooner, I get stuck like in a pirate voice all day, like and start
Sounds delightful.
teaching lessons. R, trying to shove R into like every word possible,
Well, you also work with kids, right? You teach small children, so doesn't that play into it, or do they not get any of the pirate voices? Does it not
Uh,
translate?
oh, they like that, of course, yes. So yeah, that maybe that's why I am a little more voice conducive, is because I teach kids and sometimes rock out crazy voices. One of my other guys I
That's
podcast
awesome
with,
though, man, because those are the cool teachers.
one of the other guys I podcast with who actually lives near here. So we were walking up a mountain to a hot spring, right? And he was about 10 steps ahead, and I called him just practicing his Sean Connery, to himself.
It
So
needs to live on. It needs to live beyond Sean Connery. The voice impressions do.
I guess our voice man on well front and center is Charles Fleischer for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Today's film, which I guess I should also mention, this is like Mel Blanc's last working credit. He has more credits of archival audio later on, but I think this is the last he actually did it credit where he did all the Looney Tunes one last time. But
I mean that he's the OG as far as I'm concerned. He's not my all-time favorite cartoon voice, but Mel Blanc is like in the Hall of Fame. He's kind of like the Babe Ruth.
yeah, well, I was just about spurred out. Charles Fleischer's the voice guy in this movie. I'm like, whoa, 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 that's throwing shade. I mean, Mel Blanc is also in the movie, even if he's not the lead. But yeah, this movie came out '88. I bought into all the hype on it, right? I was like, I had a Roger Rabbit stuffed toy even at age 10. Uh, I bought
I
the
bought
video
into the
game.
hype too. I just don't remember what the hype was. I remember there was a sticker book. I remember there was definitely a video game, but I never got the LJN video games. Not because like we knew better, but just because I got like one a year, and it was almost never. It was almost always like a Mario or like a big one or a Zelda.
We were a
Um,
PC house. There were two PC games. I actually, when I was looking at stuff before this podcast, there's two, and I had the one that was simply like named after the movie, and I think I was like playing it on the fourth grade computers, and then almost failed science class in the fourth grade.
were they
So
any good? Were the PC Roger Rabbit games good?
one of them I never played. The other one I played a lot, but I mean, let a 10-year-old tell you if a game's good or not. The wiki page did say that the reviews were generally good, and I remember having a good time with it. So I get like if I played it now, I'd probably be like, "What is this crap?" Right? But at the time,
That's
it was
that's
fun.
most yeah. I distinctly do remember playing the NES version of this, like renting it back when you would rent a game for like 3 or 4 days and then drop it back off. But there was a particular scene where you went into the club where Jessica Rabbit is singing, and if you looked under the table, there would be an 800 number, and if you actually called the 800 number, which I did, um, it would tell you something in her voice about giving dogs food or something. Like you could find dog food, or you could find a steak, and if you threw a steak at a dog, it let you get by a certain place in the game if you didn't figure it out on your own. But it was just that was a mind-blowing thing to me because I couldn't have been more than 8 years old at that point. I was probably a little bit younger. And the fact that my dad called a video game character that was based on a movie character, but it was actually a cartoon inside of a movie, and then the video game, and then like the phone call of the voice, it blew my mind because I mean, I guess I was a very slow learner and very optimistic, but I guess I really believed that cartoon characters were alive somewhere out in like our world, out in our reality. You could actually talk to one of them. And I think I've outed myself before, but I also remember believing that the Guess Who board game talked to you. If you remember the original commercial, and then afterwards they added a little disclaimer that was like, game pieces do not actually talk. Well, that was like because of kids like me were heartbroken when we found out that the game pieces were just printed on cardboard and they didn't actually talk back. So I
Just gotta
I don't
make
know if
them
it was
talk.
just me, but anyways, this Roger Rabbit movie represents to me like a defining moment when I guess like I still believed in, Santa Claus and Easter Bunny and Roger Rabbit and in like a very realistic way.
Maybe see. I was like maybe on being, I guess like a year or two older. I was like on
Mm-hmm.
the slightly other track where I did the math wrong. I would have been 9 actually, and I do remember seeking out the book. Who censored Roger Rabbit? Like maybe this is the first time I understood. Like sometimes people take a book and make it into a movie. And I was like, oh, I can get a preview. Which the book is very different and not great reading for a 9-year-old. So
Right. Yeah, I actually didn't even know about that this was based on a book and only loosely based on a book until I watched it and started putting notes together for this episode.
yeah, the book really confused me because the idea that the book would be so wildly different definitely didn't make sense to a 9-year-old.
And you know what's interesting too is I don't think that we're missing out on much. I think the movie did a better job of telling a story, even though it was based on this other idea. I think I like the movie's story better. And I think maybe the author did too, because the author did continue on that series and then ends up writing like a Jessica Rabbit solo novella, but he retcons in like every single book. And he did it so often that it almost became like a trademark that like what is he going to retcon in the next book? So it's so non sequitur that there's no reason that you would actually need to read into it other than being like, oh, huh, yeah, I see where, the general premise and the general characters came from.
I mean, there's plenty of times the movie's better than the book. I would The Godfather, the book is garbage. I would say The Shining. I'm on team, you know,
Team Kubrick.
and whichever of the 18 theories you want to put onto that movie.
Have you ever read Clockwork Orange?
Yes, I have. I would say I like both of those. I don't know if I'd say the movie's better.
Right, it's a hard one. It's a
Yeah,
very hard one.
that's why I didn't cite that one. But yeah, The Shining, The Godfather,
Because in the book
2001
too,
is definitely better in movie form. Although they were like written concurrently anyway. So
well, that was the Arthur C. Clarke short story, right? That
well,
you're referring to.
it was a short story, but then they wrote the screenplay and the novel 2001 kind of concurrently.
Oh, I
So
didn't know about the novel.
in the novel, like once you get to the Stargate, it's like explaining everything, which kind of ruins the whole.
Exposition.
Yeah, it's just like because you can't be like, and then psychedelic colors start morphing into spirals instead of zigzags. That
It's
wouldn't.
a good
Yeah.
point. It's a good point. Yeah. Although you kind of can, as long as you don't describe it in that sort of a way. That honestly, that's a good segue, because another one of the reasons why Who Framed Roger Rabbit I think is such a great movie is that it holds up, and I think it holds up beyond nostalgia, because if you look at reviews from people that haven't seen it before, it does seem to still be favorably looked on for a whole bunch of reasons, not just for the actual technical prowess of it, being able to blend the cartoons with the live action, but the acting is incredible. The guy that played Mario, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. What's his name? The guy that played Mario in the
Bob
Super Mario
Hoskins.
Brothers movie.
Bob
Tom
Hoskins.
Bob Hoskins. Bob Hoskins plays this role like it's real, like he's actually talking to a real partner. And I think maybe it was, easier because he was talking like a little green stick or something, but he
Oh
goes
no,
all out
it's
and he's
much
so
better than that.
serious.
It's much better than that. Charles Fleischer was on set behind the camera doing the voices, so he was talking to Roger Rabbit real time, and Charles Fleischer decided to do this while wearing a Roger Rabbit costume, and this actually did drive Bob Hoskins insane. Like with
I
this
kind of
crazy
love that. I
man in
didn't
a
know that.
rabbit suit on the other side of the camera. The whole, Bob Hoskins like started like I guess he wouldn't break character or something. Charles Fleischer sounds like a very strange man. So one, I'm going to agree. This movie holds up for at least a year after it came out. Age 9, age 10-year-old Matt probably said this was my favorite movie for a good year before, until Terminator 2 showed up. Probably, let's say that. Um, so, and that held it for a little while, but I feel like this movie hasn't held up in the like cultural zeitgeist so much. It's weirdly forgotten. When you watch it, it's great, but because Roger Rabbit spent about 5 years as one of the big six with Minnie and Mickey and Goofy. He got an actual ride at Disneyland. I mean, they started putting his shorts before movies, and then somewhere about 1993, it just kind of fizzled out, and everyone forgot about Roger Rabbit.
Well, I think that's because Roger Rabbit was this big ensemble thing, and that was kind of a big event. And it was a big event for Disney to be showing some of these, characters being a little bit more mature. I think Disney's like, haha, we're gonna die, or so like something. It's something you wouldn't hear him say outside of this particular movie, at least in that kind of time range. But I think that we've had other big ensemble movies since then that maybe like nudge this one further and further back into nostalgia for just certain people. Like Space Jam came out. That was like a big kind of nostalgia movie, and even that one's been remade since then. So I think that part of the big novelty of Roger Rabbit was just the actual animation live action and the combination of all these different characters. It was Marvel versus Capcom too, in a certain way.
Oh
And I
yeah.
think that after they burnt up that particular type of interest, maybe it just got less interesting. But I mean, on rewatches, it's still a great movie. when I started it, and you see it's about like a minute, it's a hour and 3/4, right? Like an hour and 40 minutes and change.
Yeah.
And I was kind of excited. Usually that's like, okay, this better be pretty good, but it moves along very well. And I actually went back and watched some of the deleted scenes. There's like an infamous pig head scene that actually explains a whole bunch of extra little context for the movie, but they cut it out because they said it felt like it slowed the movie down too much, which is a really good indication of they spent all that money. The scene's not even that bad, but it would have slowed the movie down just a little bit, and it's already like a really nice paced movie. So that's most of my comments on just like the movie itself. And I do have a whole bunch of cool sort of like occult references and breakdowns of it.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking more at the production as usual, but we're just watching it, so it's like right on the sleeve. It's like, well, once you start thinking about how does this work, you quickly run into a lot of issues, right? So, um, oh, I did have. Oh yeah, this. I think one other thing that maybe had kids like us more interested is this was going to be a straight up Walt Disney Productions film until shortly before release when it was bumped over to Touchstone because it was a little more adult. So there were a bunch of kids that were kind of hyped up about it, and then it's like, oh, this isn't just for you now. It's a real movie. It's not a Disney movie, which I think if to an 8 or 9 year old, that's pretty enticing.
Yeah, it definitely was like an adult cartoon movie, and I mean, if you watch it back now as an adult, I think it because it holds up, they did a very good job with it. I was surprised to find out. I did look a little bit in the technical stuff that they went so over budget that they had a lot more planned, and they had even more like technical feats and better special effects planned, but they ended up going way over budget originally and had to like cut back, I guess.
Well, they told Eisner and Katzenberg this movie is going to cost $50 million, and they were like, "Screw off! Okay, we'll do it for 30 million," which still made it the most expensive animated film at that time. And then the budget crept up to 40 million. Eisner even thought about just canceling the thing, and it did end up costing 50 million. So it's like, kind of a "we told you so," I guess, done Hollywood style.
I love this, and it's also a movie that criticizes Hollywood on top of that. And I mean, on like a slightly darker note, because this is the Occult Disney podcast, this is one of the few rides that was had such a horrific accident in a park that Disney was not able to cover it up. They actually tried to cover it up and had to settle out of court because of some of the horrible decisions that were made, which included calling a supervisor in the break room while they were on their break before calling 911, while I think it was like a 5 or 6 year old got dragged under the crazy taxi. So there was like attached to this little track ride like most Disney rides are, and someone fell out of the side of it, got caught under and dragged for 10 feet or something, and succumbed to that like 3 or 4 years later. Or so it was like a really horrible tragic thing that people are still talking about today. If you find the person's name, I'll bring it up when we get there. But
Yeah, I was sitting there thinking, is there another Roger Rabbit ride? I don't see how the Toontown spin can be fatal, but I guess that you just explained it.
yeah, I mean, there was a kid. The details are still murky again because it got settled out of court. So there's no like official, sort of like court documentation of who said what. But the idea was that they put a kid outside on the little ride or inside the little car, and the mom was next to them. And you're supposed to put the kids on the inside and the adults on the outside because there's like this little gap between the door, and this is also before they had skirts on the bottom of the ride. So the mom apparently bent down to get something and might have like pushed the kid out of the side a little bit when she bent down to grab it, thinking that he would just get pinned up and kind of like resist like almost any other ride you've ever been on. But when she did that, he pops out the side of the ride, but then there's no safety mechanism to like stop it, so it just keeps going slowly. And I guess he like rolled under it somehow because there's no skirt, and it just kept going and going, and people were screaming, and there was like a streak of remnants, and it was a horrific scene. And it was so bad that Disney, like I said, they couldn't hide this one. That's one of the few very real Disney conspiracies I believe in, that people that get hurt, maimed, or die in the park, they usually get somehow like shipped out of the park, or somehow like the official records will say, oh, technically they died, 50 feet outside of Disney property, so it was the county's fault. It's The Wire. If you've ever seen The Wire.
Well, Florida's got their utilidors, right? So
What are
makes it easy.
utilidors?
The massive corridors under the park.
Oh, right, right. Do you know
The
you know what the reason for? I mean, there's a bunch of theories, but the official reason for those is that they don't ever want to see one of the characters just walking from one part of the park to the other, because in like the center of the park, in those transitional areas, they're not really themed, and there's something way more magical about Disney being able to just like pop up at one side of the park and then pop up at another side of the park, but it's also very coordinated, so they'll never have two different Mickeys on the same up at the same time. So if Mickey like wants to leave Tomorrowland, he'll go down into the tunnels, and then another Mickey, maybe taking over the shift, will merge in some other land. And they do that to just make sure that magic is never lost, so kids are never like, wait, didn't I just see you here? How did you get, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's one I heard. Although here's just one I heard a few days ago that's mildly amusing as well. This is Disneyland, because this is the Matterhorn, and apparently a lot of the trees in Frontierland are cut into Matterhorn shapes in order to block the Matterhorn from sightlines. So you have this tree just covering up the Matterhorn, like, relatively perfectly, so you can't see it. And I was like,
Yeah,
that's
because they don't want you in reality, they want you in Disneyland.
I want you in their trance, which is kind of the case. So, um, did you see this one, the Roger Rabbit in the theater? Just out of curiosity, I do know that we made it opening night. I was at least able to get my dad onto the hype wagon.
No, I remember seeing this one with my grandparents, and it was, yeah, it was like one of the earliest memories that I still think is real, and I haven't completely distorted it out of of reality. But I remember going to see this movie and then being hyped. I thought I was going to be a cartoon character because I was still at that age. Like we've talked before, if I went and saw the Three Ninjas, I was going to be a ninja for the next week, no matter what. And if I saw a basketball movie, I was going to be a basketball star for the next week.
No, I was always clear I wasn't going to be a basketball player, so I'm terrible at basketball.
No, but I know, but all it takes is just lower that net down until it's almost like waist level, and then you just feel like you can do all kinds of crazy slam dunks, and you can pretend that you're like 8 feet tall.
I mean, I guess people like us still want to be cartoon characters, but whatever.
It's a real thing, man. Well, we're gonna get into that too. There were some weird things that came up in the research for this movie.
I guess the placing of 1947 is mostly to get the whole streetcar thing, right? The changing of public transportation. And I'm from Atlanta, which has relatively terrible public transportation.
Same, Florida,
Uh,
same. So we
yeah,
can't really go under sea level. So
and
underground is not even an option here.
where I live in Japan, they say, compared to Tokyo or something, oh, you guys have horrible public transportation, but I can use it for a whole lot of things. It's actually useful. We a lot of time when we end these, I'm like, I gotta go get the train, right? So now I do, I guess, get the benefits of public transportation a little bit more. I'm also willing to walk absurd distances, so there's that too. But yeah, LA, I haven't actually been to LA, but Atlanta, LA are extremely like you got to have a car cities. So I mean, Atlanta
Yeah,
certainly.
I've
So
been to those places. I've been to a lot of places that have public transport, and I think, in my own opinion, the best one I've ever been to is probably DC, because DC, they actually have like subways that connect to hotels and connect to businesses and connect to the actual places that you're going. Like I think that some of them are like almost open right up into a shopping mall, and they kind of maintain it a little bit better than some of the other states that I've been in, cities. Like New York City is probably the worst example of public transit, outside of if you start getting into like Chicago and maybe in some of the Californian cities too. But I think that DC actually like knocks it out of the park when it comes to the public transit. And the in case anyone's wondering, like, what are you talking about public transit? The most obvious, I guess, conspiracy theory that's baked into Who Framed Roger Rabbit is that It's not only is the movie literally about a guy that buys up the train car business just to shut it down by putting freeways in its place, but a lot of the symbolism in the movie is references to how this actually did happen years way earlier, around the time span that you're talking about, and like right in the 1940s or so, where they had the red line specifically, which is the same thing they call it in this movie.
Yeah, like if I were just thinking in Hollywood terms, I'd probably put this movie a few years earlier. Like maybe like pre World War One time ish. I think just in
It
terms of
had a
Hollywood.
hard Dick Tracy feel to it for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess noir film noir though is a little more of a late 40s, early 50s thing.
Well,
So
and they also have like a little hideaway room that was an indication of like prohibition had maybe ended somewhat recently. So I don't know. It felt like it matched like a perfect little time period where it could be just vague enough where it could just be early 1900s, and they didn't have to really define it beyond that. Because all the cartoon characters, especially being in color, made it feel way more recent than 1930s, but
that's Betty
the
Boop's problem,
characters and
right?
the reality was. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, exactly. Yeah.
um yeah, actually, even though there was such a perfect storm, I mean, once you get Donald Duck, Daffy Duck, Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse in the same shot, you're already doing like, I mean, God, think about that happening now. I mean, with streaming rights and stuff, I mean, that wouldn't happen. So this movie did come out at a perfect time for that. But I have a list here. Some characters they could not get, which weirdly they could not get Popeye, which seems a little strange. Uh, there we go.
And these are ones that they actually wanted and just were denied for whatever reason.
Yeah, they kind of wanted everybody. Oh, I they wanted what did they want? Those are characters that are actually in it. Sorry, I found the page where I do remember Popeye being someone they specifically couldn't get, and there were a couple other just like really bizarre ones where you're like, really, like Terry Toon characters. It's like you couldn't get those characters. It's kind of weird, but whatever. um, very interesting is some of the other actors because Bob Hoskins is, I mean, great actor, not an A-lister, for a very expensive movie that made a lot of money. So
I couldn't imagine anyone else in this role, to be honest.
they could. No, I couldn't either. I mean, I think he's perfect
Yeah,
in this
so who
movie.
else was on their short list that
Um,
wasn't him?
being Spielberg as the producer, the first choice was Harrison Ford. I can see that it doesn't work as well as Hoskins.
Yeah, yeah.
The second choice, I'm really glad he was not interested. Chevy Chase, no. Chevy Chase,
I
that
don't
was
know,
their
man.
second
I don't know.
choice.
I don't know. I don't want it to replace this one, but now I want to see that one in addition to this one.
Well, I want to see the next one more, which is Bill Murray, but he notoriously has the 1-900 number you have to call, and he didn't get the message because he later he was like, I would have been interested, but I just didn't get that message. So, uh,
Interesting.
and then Eddie Murphy reportedly turned down the role as he misunderstood the concept of Toons and humans coexisting. He later regretted this decision.
How did he
Um,
misinterpret that?
I don't know. He's too much of a cartoon to be Eddie Valiant, though, I think. But
Yeah,
Eddie Murphy's
yeah.
attached to like every movie in the 80s, right? Like he was going to be like the Jillian character in Star Trek 4, It's just
Yeah,
like
I
every
don't think he ever could have been Valiant in this, because Valiant's entire thing is that he doesn't laugh. That's his whole character arc, is that he goes from not laughing to I don't know. I guess at the end his performance breaks down a little bit in my opinion, but whatever. You're
and
so far into it, the fallacy of sunken cost, like you're already in.
and we have some Goldilocks stuff with Christopher Lee as Judge Doom. Um, Tim
Okay.
Curry Tim Curry auditioned for the role, but was rejected because the producers found Tim Curry too terrifying, which makes sense. It's like that or Bowie, right? Then John Cleese also expressed interest in the role, but was deemed not scary enough. So I guess Christopher
Okay.
Lloyd's
Interesting.
right in that space, which I think is because
He
Judge Doom
was
is
a little
terrifying, but
terrifying
yeah,
for
oh yeah.
because I saw this, I guess, what, like 2 or 3 years before, or younger than you did. We saw it at the same time, but I do distinctly remember at the very end when he turns into a tune that was frightening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was pretty terrified as a 9-year old, and you know, he just sells it so wonderfully. So
It
um
is kind of interesting now watching it, and I've got like a nice big I don't have a 4K screen, but I've got like a 1440p or whatever, like a 2K screen. And there are some of the scenes where you can see like the prosthetics where the skin tone and the skin texture just completely overlap. And obviously when I was a kid, I don't see any of that stuff because I was being terrified, but also because you're watching it on a CRT or you're watching it in a movie theater, and this is one that I hadn't ever seen in high definition on like a really good screen. But even seeing all of the little like flaws and stuff, it didn't make any of it seem cheesy, to be honest.
no, production wise, I could definitely see the theme showing. I was watching, I think, the 2002 DVD or whatever. And and I think they've had a more restored version since then. Maybe it looks better.
Mm.
But you could see the seams didn't distract too much from the movie. And at the same time, when you can see the seams in older films, sometimes it's like charming because it's like handmade, you know? So it's like
Practical
kind of okay.
effects, man. Practical effects hold up so damn well.
There was some looking into doing this one with more CGI stuff because we've already mentioned Young Sherlock Holmes had some, you know, Black Cauldron had some CGI. That was considered just like way too expensive in 1987, 88 to do it that way. So they did revert to basically doing this practically. I mean, they were like building robot arms to hold up the, you know, hold up different props and stuff. That's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
I saw some of those, and yeah, they would have like a little arm just moving around to like hand you something, like a glass, and then they would just draw on top of that like a traditional animator would, frame by frame.
So even if I can see the seams, it's still kind of cool. Like before we move on into the real deep stuff, I just want to do two follow-ups for this if people want to do some extracurricular watching of some truly bizarre stuff. If you do like Judge Doom, I would say look up a supercut of this. The show's not very good, but 10 years later, he did a show for UPN called Deadly Games. It aired after Voyager, so it had a surprising number of Star Trek people guest starring on it. But Christopher Lloyd played a video game villain brought into the real world called Sebastian Jackal. Just the name is the best villain name. He's basically playing like a slightly toned down Judge Doom. Toned down as in you can watch him for extended scenes. Because if you just had to watch Judge Doom for scene upon scene, it's going to get wearing. So it's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
toned down like in a good way. So I would say, you know, just look up a super cut of Sebastian Jackal scene sometimes because it's Christopher Lloyd
I've
just
never
like
heard of that before. That's
hamming it
interesting.
at his best. The other one, so Charles Fleischer, I don't know quite what his deal is. Maybe he was annoying. I mean, he annoyed Bob Hoskins on set in his Roger Rabbit costume, apparently, because he didn't do a whole lot after this. But one thing he did do is the 50th anniversary Disneyland special, which I think is introduced by Ronald Reagan or something. I might be conflating with another Disneyland special, but there's one with the Ronald Reagan introduction, and starts in the Cheers bar, which is weird. It's got all these like different properties as part of it, but Charles Fleischer plays basically every employee at Disneyland in the special, and it's pretty amusing.
It sounds like a corporate comedy.
Yeah, and it's in a weird place because Cheers is NBC. So 2 years later, no way that would not happen. But it was just in the, like Roger Rabbit. It was in this like little weird space of time. So you got the Cheers gang, you got the Muppets, and you got Charles Fleischer's every employee of Disneyland. So uh,
And this is almost transitioning into the occult aspects of it, but another reason I think why Roger Rabbit maybe isn't around as much today as he was is because I think he was always designed practically and maybe symbolically to come together of all these different components of all these different mainstream characters, and then, you know, kind of like amplify them a little bit, reinvigorate them, and then it seems like he just kind of like dispersed again. But it's not like he disappeared. He just kind of like went back and gave everyone their items back. So like his hands came from Mickey, and his shoes came from like Goofy, or I don't know what the exact characters were, but there's like a whole breakdown of where every different component, his cheeks come from Bugs Bunny. Like, so basically the cheeks, the silhouette of his head, his whole entire profile came directly from Bugs Bunny. So like all these little components come together and turn into Roger Rabbit, and then he's the star of this whole movie with these main characters being background, right? Like Dickie, or Mickey and Daffy and Donald and Goofy and all of them, they're barely even like a assisting cast, right? Like they're basically background characters that have maybe one or two lines just to say they did and to hear those voices. But Roger Rabbit, he is the main cartoon character throughout the entire movie. So I don't know. I feel like the reason why he doesn't exist as much is because he never really existed on his own right. Like he was just an amalgamation of all those other characters.
It's almost like maybe some of the big characters are against him in a way because well, this is Eddie, but Bugs and Mickey, you know, like basically try to murder Eddie Valiant themselves by giving him an anvil or whatever it is. Tweety Bird, same sort of thing. Tweety, of course, is always relatively violent towards Sylvester, but otherwise, Tweety Bird's supposed to be cute, and Tweety Bird's not supposed to murder you with a nursery rhyme.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where another part of I guess we're getting into the occult stuff now because the only way to explain this is how this movie represents a reality where two different dimensions actually can interact with each other, and it's like a two-way street where you're not just seeing apparitions and it's not just certain people. Like everybody somehow can see, interact with like a two-dimensional character, and then the two-dimensional characters can interact with three-dimensional characters. But I think that there's actually an alchemical reference to this, and it's called Mundus Imaginalis, I think, which means the imaginary world. But it makes this argument that if you believe in it kind of hard enough, almost like the concept of Maya, which is the shared illusion, that if you believe in it hard enough and enough people believe in it hard enough, that some of these like imaginary realities can be interacted with and maybe can come into some kind of a being. I don't know if I believe all in 100% in like the woo woo aspect of that, but this isn't something that came out in like the 1940s or 60s or 80s. Like we're talking about 1400s and earlier when people were discussing this kind of a concept, and this Roger Rabbit brings it as close as you probably can to illustrating it in a very seamless way where you've got two different realities. And just like you were saying, they're trying to kill Valiant. It's not exactly that they're trying to kill him, because Roger Rabbit explains a little bit into the movie that he was like he gets handcuffed to him. And we can start at the beginning of the movie, but there's a specific scene where they get handcuffed and he's trying to saw the handcuffs off, and he's like, can you stop moving? And he slips, Roger Rabbit slips his entire hand out of the handcuff, and he was like, are you telling me that you could have taken your hand out of that handcuff at any time? But Roger Rabbit says, not at any time, only when it's funny. And I feel like it might be a throwaway line and people might chuckle at it, but if you go back and you imagine that it's two different realities, it's our reality that we're in right now that has its own set of rules, and then this cartoon reality, and one of the rules of that reality is that events can only happen if they're funny and if like comedy is involved. So going back to you're saying like, oh, they're trying to kill him, I don't think they're trying to kill him because they knew, or somehow in their reality, like it was a funny thing, so it had to happen. Like they are compelled by doing funny things regardless of the outcome. But because that's part of the rules of that reality, another part of their reality is that it doesn't necessarily mean that a bad thing happens, even though the humor is about something bad maybe happening. Just like people only ride roller coasters because it makes you feel like you're not going to survive it. If you got into a roller coaster and you weren't even concerned for a second, even in your reptilian brain, like, oh, I might die from this, then they wouldn't be thrilling. So I don't know. I think that they correlate in some way.
I've managed to do that on a roller coaster.
What's it
So
to
your
just be
stomach's
completely apathetic?
Yeah, but your stomach still turns a little bit. So, like you said, there's a little bit going on. But no, I've intentionally gotten on just be like, I'm going to try and zen out this roller coaster and see how it goes, right? So, I mean, it's kind of
But you
like
still you have to get a little bit of an adrenaline rush
that's
on
that's why
some
I
of the
brought in
like
this.
ups and downs,
Yeah, that's
right?
why I brought in the stomach drop and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But you could still kind of mentally, like, kind of like how you can turn off your shiver if you're cold. Like you can kind of do that mentally, and you can not be ticklish if you want to be not ticklish. So,
I
uh,
don't believe that one.
Oh, I used to be very ticklish, and I cannot be tickled now. So,
I guess so. I mean, it's the same with like
like,
overcoming the gag reflex, like the sword swallowers and stuff.
yeah, like you're kind of
It's like,
agreeing with yourself, to turn it off, right? So,
yeah, like I'm okay. We can die
or to
doing
turn it
this.
on.
Don't worry, I got this.
So Judge Doom does murder Eddie's brother Teddy. Is it his intention? Like he wasn't trying to be funny. He was trying to murder. Like he's different than the other Toons in some way.
I mean, clearly he is different
Oh yeah.
than the other Toons in some way. I don't know. It's a good. That's actually a better philosophical question. But I feel like he was the catalyst. He kind of represented. Here's where the rules between these two worlds don't interact well. You know what I mean? Like he was the anomaly. Just like there's always going to be some weird mutation or anomaly at some point. So he represented that aspect of it.
So he's Neo breaking out of the Toontown Matrix.
Yeah, dude, he's like the Rift. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, what if the Toons really are evil and they really are bad, and they just have this really great facade? Technically, Doom is the good guy in this, isn't
Yeah.
he?
It's hard to call Doom a good guy, but you did make me think of the South Park Imagination Land, or the was it the Woodland Critters? So that's kind South Park kind of
Yeah,
took
the
that.
Easter special.
Yeah, so South Park sort of took that idea and ran with it a bit, I think. Um, the other thing I was definitely thinking about, like that other world. Here it's Toontown. You drive through a tunnel or you break down a wall, which is, I guess, a bit of a metaphor at the end. Um, but Dreamtime. That's kind of our own Toontown, isn't it? Like where the rules don't make sense, where things, there's maybe fear of death, but I assume things in your dream aren't trying to murder you unless you happen to live on Elm Street. So,
There's a lot of people that I talk to that do have dreams about, basically always people coming to like try and kill them or attack them or chase them down or something.
like actually last Sunday night, I watched a Twilight Zone, and then I was going to go to bed, and I needed to wake up a little early to do an episode for that podcast. So I was like, okay, I'll see the episode, and then I'll just knock out till 6:45 a.m. I'll get up and I'll just get straight to talking about it. And then had like so much ridiculous dream content in between. It was like I'd gone on 5 trips. So uh,
Those
I
are great, man. I mean, on like the lucid dreaming aspect, I used to not be able to remember my dreams at all, maybe a year or two ago, but I had a meeting with lucidcenter.org, I think. Shout out
mhm.
lucidcenter.org. I hope that's your real website. But I had like a free session with one of them and prep for one of these podcasts where I was going to interview them, and they gave me some incredible advice that completely changed my ability to be better than what it was. Like I'm not an expert or anything, but someone that's like, I mean, if you already have decent dreams and you can memorize them, these are awesome tips to get it even further. So one of them is a reality check. And one of the better ones I've heard about is some people will wear a like a rubber band around their wrist or some kind of like a rubber bracelet and have an alarm on their phone, and they'll set the alarm. If you want to go hardcore, it's like every 15 minutes. You can do it
Mhm.
every hour, every 4 hours. But the point is that every time your alarm goes off, you just train yourself to snap that bracelet. And if you do it to the point where you hear the alarm going off in your pocket and you just snap the bracelet like unconsciously almost because you've been doing it so long, the idea is that if you're ever in a dream, the alarm will go off and you'll snap the bracelet, but you won't feel the bracelet snapping your wrist. And it's like a trigger to let you know, hey, you're in dream time right now without you necessarily waking up. That was one of the biggest tips, although it wasn't described to me that way. He described to me reality checks for like when you grab for items, door handles, or like glasses. Imagine your hand going through it. But the wrist snap thing is something someone else told me recently that I love. And the other big one was the second you wake up, if you can remember your dream at all, before you get up or roll over, like if you had to go to the bathroom, before you do anything, like lay back down and close your eyes and just go through an inventory of like, what emotions was I just feeling? Was I happy? Was I sad? Was I scared? Like go through all of those. And if you feel like maybe, yeah, I felt happy or maybe I felt scared, then you start thinking like, did I see certain people? Was I in a house? Was I in a boat? Like, was it hot? Was it light? And start trying to do like a checklist. And the more of those that you can figure out and put that dream together, it actually makes it easier to do it over time, to the point where that this is the one thing was a breakthrough for me. Some people can do it automatically. For me, it was like, I never thought I'd be able to do it. But wake up from one dream, get up, go get like a glass of water or whatever, go back to sleep, and then like go right back into the dream that you left, but having like control, like actively wanting to do that and doing it just by remembering where it was at, and then right as you go back to sleep, just like put all those things back into place. And I don't know, it's weird being able to feel like you have some kind of control over your subconscious thoughts and your dreams. It's like a really weird feeling.
Yeah, I have that. Actually, that was part of the Sunday morning dream or Monday morning dream sequences. Where you have an uncomfortable dream or a nightmare and you wake up. That doesn't feel good. And yeah, you kind of go back and finish it with a little bit
Yeah,
more
yeah. Like
control.
I need to see this through.
Just to amend a few things you said, where you're talking about kind of like lie back and assess your emotions. If you really do have to take a piss or something and you can't do that, something else to do is just write down like two keywords, and those two keywords will help you remember a whole lot
Interesting.
more. So, like what I remember
What
basic,
keywords? Like what would the keywords be?
well, I didn't do this for the one I just told you about, but I would have written down brutalist landscapes because the dream involved like going and there was a lot of events happening which I didn't remember, but if I had put written down a few words and looked at a few hours later, a lot more of those details would have come to me.
Right. Yeah,
Maybe
good
just
point.
when you're writing down the word you remember, so you're associating that way. So you could probably do both. You can do that and assess if you don't need to take a piss or something. But actually this morning I
Well,
do
hopefully
remember.
we'll just all get chipped and you won't have to remember anything. It'll just be recorded. You'll have like the
uh,
DVR going on.
oh yeah, there we go. No, even this morning I checked an email response from you, and then was like, that wasn't the real iPad. So I woke up. I was like, oh, because I like
It was
literally
like a
read.
dream response.
Yeah, it was a dream response, and I mean, yeah. So because you didn't respond, which is fine because we're here and doing this. But I just get up and check my dream iPad and got a dream response. Sometimes, see, that's my problem. Most of my astral travel these days is like checking the dream phone or something, which is I guess why you shouldn't have the devices near you when you're sleeping. But
That was a board game, wasn't it? Dream Phone.
oh yeah, should be. Is that where you get a blind date or something in high
I think
school?
so. Yeah, you like go to the mall. Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of guessing there, but
And on that same note too about the lucid dreaming, that's another really good practice is if you think you're in a lucid dream, or you can train yourself to do this while you're awake, to like look at something, a billboard or a street sign or anything that has text, look at it, read it, look down, and then look back up at it again and just read it again. So just read everything twice, because very rarely in a dream will you be able to read text and look away and then look back at it and the text be the same, which is just another one of these like weird like cheat codes. It's like a matrix glitch that you can look out for.
I'm in general, I've kind of come down more of the side of having very vivid dreams. I like actually letting my subconscious drive the dream and then just remembering in a very good detail. I have done a few lucid dreams, and I found the most exciting thing for me about the lucid dream is just the entering them. I've done the. Have you heard of the wild method?
Wake and initiated lucid dream.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've managed that several times. Um, I'd usually like wake up at like 4 or 5 in the morning and then kind of
I
go
got to
to.
do my shout out for my Time Samplers comic series. This is the first comic that I came out with, and the entire premise is that they actually have something called a wild machine, and it's like a big joke. Like they hate the name of it, but it's a real name because it stands for Wake Initiated Lucid Dream, and it basically means like you don't have to wait to go into REM sleep and which takes, I don't know, it's like 3 hours or something. Awake Initiated Lucid Dream, you could technically just snap right into it.
For me, I did have, like I said, I had to wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning, so my brain's probably halfway wired there anyway. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually found out that this is a Tibetan position after I'd done it a few times, which is basically lying on one on your side, like on your hand, one hand, and the other hand is just kind of on your hip. And but that one's kind of cool. You start seeing kind of like ghostly images and clouds, and eventually one of those like coalesces, and whoop, now you're like somewhere else. So that's
Really?
probably
That
one of the
sounds
most. That's got to
bizarre.
be the most psychedelic experience I've ever had without using any substances in that case. And then I
That
had
you
the
know
jump.
of.
I've had the jump method work. So
What's the
where I
jump method again?
that's like one of your
Looks
reality
familiar.
checks where you jump and see if you're
Okay.
floating. And I did just check once. I was, oh shit, I'm floating. So it was a dream.
I've heard one of those too. Yeah, the only one that's ever worked for me so far has just been like reaching for handles, and then I've never done the snap thing before, but there's other ways you can do it. Some people do like a finger check, so they'll like constantly do one of these things with their fingers, and sometimes you'll like go to like the inner pads, and when you go to do that in your dream world, like you'll still go through the motion, but you'll notice that you don't feel anything. You're not feeling your fingers like touch each other. And if you can train yourself to notice that kind of thing, and also, but you would kind of look like a weirdo. You just always be around in public. You'd kind of look like Rain Man, right? Or like you're always plotting against somebody.
See, I think this is where I became a fan of the vivid dream. I was having a very vivid dream that went lucid, and then the kind of plot of what was happening just kind of went away. And then I was like in like this oceanside like restaurant, and I was just like checking out like the reflections and handles, like you were saying, like in the lucid dream. Like I was just like checking out what things looked like because I knew it was a dream. I was like, I don't know. I think I prefer. I was like, I was having this really interesting story going on, and now I'm staring at reflections, which is very cool again. But just like, eh. um,
And to bring it back to the movie a little bit, but also through this little segue of lucid dreaming, it does seem that this movie, if you had to understand it and watch it as like a serious movie, it kind of takes place in this lucid dream world. And that's one of the reasons why I guess Doom is trying to get rid of cartoons in some regard. And it's also why there's human beings that are okay with Toons going away forever, and a lot that don't like Toons, and they're the ones that just don't want to have these weird possibilities and like this lucid dreaming stuff to even be a possibility. Like, who even cares about it? That has nothing to do with this mundane world. And you can kind of see that where our money doesn't translate over to them. Nothing really translates between our world and their world, except for maybe sex, which is a weird one.
Yeah, we can. The rule, like I said, well, the more you think about the rules, the more it's like, what? But by the way, my segue was just going to be like driving through the tunnel and then the cartoon world opening up in front of you it was a little bit like my. Uh, I just thought about the wild method entry from that a little bit. Also, yeah, just the idea of going down a long dark tunnel could have many connotations. Zemeckis and Spielberg love that tunnel, though. Isn't that the same one that's in Back to the Future movies and probably in like 80 other things?
There's a few other nods to that too.
Makes sense. I don't think he made a film between. Maybe did he make Jewel the Nile? I don't remember. Anyway, I think this was his follow. Yeah, this was his follow up to Back to the Future, I believe. So makes sense that there'd be some callbacks and things. Probably, I guess, just thinking about parts 2 and 3 at the time. Um, First thing, well, before we get into sex, why don't we talk about food? That's kind of weird. I get the
Food.
tunes, yeah, because some of the tunes are eating. Roger Rabbit, gets drunk and explodes, right? So, and when
Although
one
I
of
wouldn't say that's food. That doesn't count as food so
well, it's
much.
okay, yeah, it's something you would ingest. Although to be fair, when he slams the whiskey or the drink at the bar, you do see all of it go straight through him because on set they just threw a glass of some kind of liquid, so he didn't get much of it. But yeah, I was like, well, do cartoons also poop? I mean, Tweety probably does because it's funny, right?
Of course, that's what you're concerned of. You're just like, who's
Only if
pooping?
it's funny
How's
though.
the poop
Yeah,
work?
yeah, but it's only if it's funny, right? Like they can't.
That's true.
Can they only eat when it's funny? Is that, I mean, I'm like, how hard and fast is this rule? Jessica Rabbit's like slightly funny, but I mean, she's got different goals, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's a good idea, but that was Roger Rabbit describing the rule that applied to him in his reality. I don't know if that means that it would have to apply cartoon wide. So I don't know if Jessica Rabbit would have to do anything, because she also has that line that I'm not bad, I was only drawn that way, which you can almost see like the Walmart shirts with like the overweight, Walmart people wearing it. It's like, I'm not bad, I was just drawn that way. But I think that describes her rules within that reality too, where it's like maybe she doesn't want to be this vixen, but they were like, she was specifically drawn to fill that exact role, and there's no real decision about it. So and this also I think ties into a really interesting dichotomy. And like when you juxtapose the cartoon reality with our reality, it's also taking place in Hollywood, and it's around all of these actors and directors and people that are lying and have all these ulterior motives. But in the cartoon world, it doesn't seem like there is a Hollywood or anything. Like you're just a cartoon and you just are who you are, and that just happens to be entertaining for some people to want to put you into movies and be in Hollywood. But it's this completely different reality because the cartoons feel like they're always being their pure selves, whereas it's the humans that are constantly trying to cover up their true intentions or act differently than how they actually feel, which is almost every single human in this entire movie that you see.
Yeah, like Judge Doom's shaving a haircut, like is 100% going to work, and it does, which is
Right, that's a
stupid.
rule.
It's funny. It's that's why, because it's the
Well,
worst
and
decision possible, but it's funny.
that's one of the best examples that I could think of is the shaving a haircut to bits, because that one is where I think like I would love to laser focus and figure out the exact rules of this world, because did that happen because it was funny and that's why Roger had to bust through the wall and finish the shaving the haircut to bits joke, or is shaving a haircut to bits like this other more superior role that applies to all cartoon members, and someone would have had to do it outside of that? And especially since it's Judge doing it, maybe it's only when a cartoon starts it another cartoon has to finish it. Like I've That's where all my unanswered questions went. It wasn't about poop as much, but
Now, what he was wrong about was when he looks at the record and was like, "Drunks wouldn't listen to these loony tracks," because I've had multiple occasions where I'm drinking with people and then proceed to play them the worst of the Beach Boys. I love the Beach Boys, but for some reason I'll have a few drinks and then just start playing people their shittiest tracks because it's fun.
because why not? Yeah, let's just put it on some of the
Uh,
worst.
just if anyone wants to know what I'm looking about, and hey, I'm not even going to go with Mike Love on this one. Go look up Brian Wilson, Smart Girls, and see if you get through it.
Is that one of the songs?
It's when he was still under the control of Dr. Eugene Landy, and they made him write a rap song.
Oh my god.
So it's a mentally disturbed man trying to rap in the late '80s, which is woo. So I know Mike Love is like the villain of the Beach Boys, but Brian Wilson is responsible for the worst thing that ever came out of any of those guys.
I
Kind of
wish I didn't know
responsible.
about that, but yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up now.
Well, do you chase it down with Pet Sounds or something? It'll be fine. um, see what else. Charles Fleischer is voicing several people here. He does Psycho, I guess that is one of he does Benny the Cab is also Roger Rabbit and Benny a Cab are the same voice. Again, Mel Blanc is half the voices we hear. The Disney gang is being voiced by the '80s iterations of the people that voiced them, so those are all different. But just getting meta wise, I also wanted to consider the fact that a lot of these people, these tunes, do have technically the same voice. I don't know if that is it. I mean, that could just be production realities, but I was just thinking that's interesting that certain people might kind of have, like, I don't know, you get like soul families or something, like the Looney Tunes crew is like a Toon soul family or something.
The voice impersonations too is a fascinating topic for me, because especially with like AI coming out now, there's all these discussions about whether or not you could trademark your voice. And like for example, Morgan Freeman, like at this point, if you make a model of Morgan Freeman's voice and you make him say whatever you want, is there any repercussion for that? Anything to prevent you from doing that? And if there is, what does that mean for people that could just impersonate? Like we were talking earlier, people that are really good at doing voice impersonations. So what if you just know someone that does like a killer Christopher Walken, or a Leonard Nimoy, or whatever the kids are doing these days? But if you can do one of those voices perfectly, are you just like not allowed to do that because it sounds too close? Because then if AI version of someone's voice can get banned, couldn't you just train a model on a voice impersonator and then have the same voice? I don't know. It's such a fascinating concept to me, but it's also because I think in the future, especially cartoons and CG animated stuff, they're not going to need an actual voice actor to sit in the studio and do a lot of this stuff. Some of the intonations maybe, but I feel like in the next year or two they'll have AI voice things where they just have, someone go into a studio and have a whole bunch of different dialogue and they throw at this scene, and then they'll never have to come in again.
Well, I want to throw out a few non-AI modern analogs to that, other ways to do it. One will be the Trek Star Wars dork comparison. Well, not really, because I'm talking about technical stuff, but
What is
about
this? The what
okay,
comparison?
First, let me the Star Wars Star Trek dork comparison. But first, I want to go about 10 years back. Uh, Roger Ebert's last years of his life. Yeah, yeah, yes, thank you. In the last years of Roger Ebert's life, he could not speak anymore, right? And at some
Right.
point, someone took all of those at the movies, and I guess that maybe they did use AI. I'm not sure, but basically compiled where he could talk Stephen Hawking style, but it
Okay.
actually was his voice. They had reconstituted his voice from all these elements.
Right.
So,
So yeah, kind of like Mellotron-y. I don't know if you know what a Mellotron
oh
is. You
yeah, I know what a
probably do.
mellotron is.
So that, yeah, I think there was like a more digital version of that. It wasn't quite AI, but it was, it was an amalgamation. It was like a version of his voice made from different samples and then reconstituted to sound like his voice. I'm sure I've never heard it before. Does it sound good, or did it sound like nightmare fuel, like it sounds like just being described?
Oh, I can't answer that part. So I don't. I mean, he wasn't doing episodes about the movies like this. This was simply for him to communicate and feel like slightly less like screwed up, I guess, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, not just like
even if
trapped in your head.
yeah, it's kind of nice to be able to. I mean, his writing was fine. I think he was writing movie reviews up till he died. So, his brain was still there. But yeah, it's kind of, oh, that sounds like me. That's cool because I can't do that anymore. The Trek Star Wars thing would be episodes last year, Obi-Wan Kenobi series. I think this one I'm not 100% sure about, but I believe they did something similar with James Earl Jones where he's like consenting, he's giving them elements, but I don't think he was actually like performing as Darth Vader for that. I think they were
Hmm.
using some computer stuff to use his actual voice and not quite full on AI but along those lines. And again, a few years earlier, they had put Peter Cushing's face on, years after he died. So that now being notorious for kind of being the first time they really brought in a dead person to have a role in a movie, right?
Well, we were also talking earlier about all the different people that might have played Valiant, right? All the different, Bill Murray might have been one of them, and all the different people that might have been Doom.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably what's going to make all this stuff a moot point, because it's not going to be, oh, did James Earl Jones let you license his likeness and all stuff? It's just going to be like, hey, the James Earl Jones variant of Star Wars is the one that's doing the best right now, and you can put any actor you want in the different roles, and it's going to be like the ones that people want the most end up going that way. I don't know. I feel like that's the direction that it's going to be kind of headed. Like, you can get to customize all those different aspects of it.
Now the other one, now this is the one I like because I like analog and I like chop and tape and stuff like that. There was a Star Trek Prodigy episode last year where the captain of their show goes into the holodeck to try and get training because he's not really a captain, and they bring back legacy Star Trek characters. All of them are actors who have passed on, except for they had Dr. Crusher just so they could have like someone doing some proper interactive dialogue. But they had Scotty and Uhura and Spock were there, and Odo Rene Auberjonois apparently didn't have enough good content, so he doesn't talk in this episode, but he's there. But the others, they just had interns go back through like all the old Star Trek episodes and just clip lines. So it was complete sentences. So you have you have Spock making speeches in Leonard Nimoy's voice, but the audio quality keeps changing. Like one is clearly from the 60s, and then you'll hear like a kind of a very old Nimoy speaking the next line. So it's
So this
clunky, but
sounds
in a way I
like the
like it.
South Park one where Isaac Hayes dropped out because they were getting a little bit too jokey about Scientology, and they just started putting his lines together the same way. They just went back through all of the other dialogue that he'd ever said, and they could basically make any word they wanted after that.
Yeah, in this case, it was kind of like a legacy, like oh, let's memorialize these people because they didn't just change up the sentences. It was like full lines of dialogue taken directly out
Okay.
of old stuff and stitched together that way, not words. So that makes it a little rougher sounding. That makes it comedic sounding, right? And then just recently they had Majel Roddenberry doing the computer voice. I think again that was clips from, but yeah, but again you're enlisting these uh, dead actors to take on roles that they never signed on, and then AI you're like manipulating that even further, which I guess is part of the issue. So
Well, and now you can like mold voices too, right? You could be like, I want to take the AI Frank Sinatra and the AI Pat Buttram and combine those and get like a Sinatra Buttram sort of sound going.
there's something interesting because okay, they got Mel Blanc to do his last thing, so it's like authentic Looney Tune voices, as authentic Disney voices as you're going to get in 1988 with the companies backing it. Because whoever was the person doing it at the time, which I could look up their names, but I didn't. But the Singing Sword is archival recordings of Frank Sinatra, who was still living at the time they made this movie. So
You're
that's a
going to be
little
in this
weird.
movie whether you want to or not.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's just like we're using an old public. I guess it was probably a public domain recording because they were using maybe one of his first things, right? So, uh, like, hey, it's public domain. We can use it. I mean, maybe he loved it. I don't know what he thought, or maybe he put a contract out on some
That
Amblin
sounds
people.
closer to it. Yeah. I want my cut.
No, I remember when Frank Sinatra died. Actually, it's Mark who's on some of my other podcasts, and him and I were like, "Gee, I wonder how many contracts just went out when Frank Sinatra died." He's like, "These people are coming down with me," you know?
Vegas, just all of a sudden people start moving out.
Yeah, yeah. There's you lose half of Vegas overnight. Yeah, one half of Vegas shoots the other half. Maybe that's how it works. um, we've been kind of like serendipitously falling into different occult corners, but I imagine you have a few that you noted.
Yeah, I've got a few really good specific ones, I think. So
Okay.
one of them that I mentioned was just the two different dimensions that are kind of intersecting. I think that's probably the coolest aspect of this movie because they do it so well. And just like those rules, that's my favorite one is the shaving a haircut to bits. And it just makes me think like, what's the actual rule behind that? Because it does seem compulsory in some way. And is it like a universal rule for that entire universe? Is it just for Roger? Is it just between cartoons? And that is one of the examples of why I think there's so many cool little threads you can follow throughout this movie because there's so many of those little rules that are sort of placed in here. Another one that it reminds me of that this might be because I don't know if you ever heard of Second Life before and some of the other like online cross realities. Have you heard of
I just
Second Life in particular?
because of the hot tub time machine joke at the beginning, where he's like, "You've been working out in prison in Second Life for like a month now." He's like, "You do the crime, you pay the time," something like that. There's some not good jokes that movie too, but that one I thought was pretty funny.
And there's been a lot of memes that have been either like made into Second Life and then Second Life turns it into an even bigger meme and it's this whole sort of interesting feedback cycle. But there's also an interesting aspect of Second Life that people can make their custom avatars and upload them, and that's where you might walk into a world and it's like you've got a very serious looking Godzilla with textures and details and maybe like a little bit of sheen to them, and then you'll have like a little tiny, like hentai midget fuzzy or furry character, and then you'll have like some weird anime baby with huge eyes, and they're all interacting in the same world, maybe like arguing over real estate or something like mundane, because again, like within these shared spaces, there's this one agreed upon reality, but then when they go into their own little bubbles, and they surround themselves with just other characters within their little genres, like they really are transporting themselves to a completely different mental space, right? It's almost like you were describing, kind of like zoning out and doing your lucid dreaming, awake initiated lucid dream. It would be very hard to convince me that awake initiated lucid dream can't be the same as someone sitting in front of World of Warcraft and zoning out for 6 or 7 hours and just like not even knowing that they have a body anymore, right? Like an actual body in this world. They're out like fighting monsters or whatever and like slaying dragons. So I
I
think
mean,
there's a very real aspect of that.
that's one of the main things about seeing a movie in a movie theater. It's like that's the temple you that happens to you in a movie theater. Like
Or a coffin.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I just saw actually that I just went to see the new Mission Impossible where the main henchman, we'll call him, gets into like an electro coffin and puts on like an electro mask and has like the AI just like give him instructions and information and stuff. So
Well, that's pretty badass.
yeah, yeah. So by the way, have you seen that movie? That's
I haven't
very
seen it yet.
okay.
No,
That
it reminds me of man, what was the Philip K. Dick animated movie with Keanu Reeves
oh
that
yes,
had something similar where they had like this mask that they could put on, it would constantly
Scanner
shift
Darkly.
around. Yeah, Scanner Darkly. That's right.
There you go. Okay, I have it on DVD somewhere, so I was like, I should be
Which
able to
also I think
remember
had
that.
a clip of like Alex Jones in it, unless that was Waking Life.
That's Waking Life, but yeah, also cool. I tend to watch Waking Life more because I like that kind of dream logic. Which again, that's what we're only actually in Toontown for like 8 minutes in Roger Rabbit, which kind of
It
shocked
might
me.
be my least favorite part of the movie too. I much prefer cartoons in reality than reality inside of a cartoon
When
world.
I was 8 years old, that was, I guess, maybe too short for me. Yeah, now the other stuff is more interesting, but um, I guess I'm just saying, like, because we watch movies like that, because this movie's getting very meta, it's like, okay, here's this wall we always see, and we're at the end of the movie, they literally break the wall, right? So
Mhm.
that's metaphysics that when you were 8 and I was 9, we would have also gotten, like an 8 and
Well,
9
and
year
they
old can
also
understand
have the
that.
hole. The portable hole was a really good example of explaining to a 9-year-old this concept of breaking the normal reality that we're used to, right? Because they got the hole, and you can just like put it in a wall and then stick your hand through it. That's what one of the cops does in the beginning. But it's also how Eddie gets away at the end, as he uses one of these holes to kind of temporarily transport part of his body out of this reality and then back into it. And the way that it's communicated is such a simple concept because it's the little hole that Bugs Bunny comes out of, or it's the one that Porky comes out of to like come out at your screen. So you understand, like, oh, the portable hole is a portal to another dimension. And in that other dimension, like you can basically like take part of your physical being and remove just a part of it, and the other part remains here because obviously you see the arm go in and the arm come back out, and no one's like, oh my god, my arm hurts, or like, oh, what happened to my fingers, or whatever. Like, it seems like it's just a normal casual aspect of this reality. So I don't know, I think it's like it's basically teaching quantum physics to children at that point, but in a very understandable way.
I do remember the holes being one of the main mechanics of that PC video game I played. Maybe it was like a proto portal. I don't know.
Yeah, great game. I mean, Portal's a great game too for that same reason.
Yeah, I
It would be
honestly,
an awesome if someone made like a Roger Rabbit themed Portal sequel.
and is the computer Jessica or
I know. I think you're probably trying to like sneak a peek on Jessica. That's the game. It's like a Leisure Suit Larry. Where is Roger Rabbit?
yeah. Except that we have to get back to his Roger Rabbit horny. I mean, he wants to play patty cake, right?
Right. And so okay, so I want to just like dive headfirst into this one because for whatever reason there was so many scenes when they imply that everyone wants to bang Jessica Rabbit, including Valiant, even though that he's like working for Roger Rabbit. Her name's literally Jessica Rabbit, like they're together, and Jessica claims to be in love with this rabbit, and everyone's like, how could this be? But it's also because it's a bunch of people in the real world trying to figure out how a relationship works between two cartoon characters, where again, as she's like, I'm drawn this way, so she doesn't have a choice over how she looks. So it's not like she's dressing up a certain way to attract a certain type of person. Like, she was created that way by someone outside of her power. But the other weird aspect of this is all of these adult real men that want to, maybe, I think, what did Eddie's girlfriend says, like dabbing into the watercolor or something. I'm trying to remember what the exact phrase was.
Yeah, it was
Oh yeah,
definitely
dabbing
watercolor.
in watercolor. She's, oh yeah, dabbing in watercolors, Eddie. So apparently this is a known thing that already happens between adults and cartoons in this reality, for there to be a bunch of different slang terms for it, being dabbing your stick in the watercolor or whatever. But it made me think and go on this tangent. are men attracted to cartoons more than women are attracted to cartoons? Is this like a like a weird gender thing? And it's not. It actually isn't just men. As much as some people be like, yeah, it's a man thing because they're so visual or whatever. But there a guy won the Nobel Prize, I think in the 1970s, for this concept called supernormal stimuli or a supernormal stimulus. And I've got a couple like real brief notes on this, and also goes into some Japanese theory. So you
I
might be
was
able to
about
give me
to
some.
I was about to give
So
you some.
okay, so no, we've got some. So supernormal stimulus is an artificial object that triggers an animal's instinctual response more intensely than the natural analog. So it's something that has been artificially created that makes you respond even more than you would if you saw like the real version of the thing that you're being shown, which might not sound groundbreaking, because that's how I guess most things work. But the more you look into it, it's very formulaic. And here's like this global mind control aspect where maybe there's something to this. But the Nobel Prize winner, he basically says that supernormal stimuli not only explain this heightened response, but it explains the hentai aspect, which kind of gets into this Roger Rabbit, Jessica Rabbit. But it also talks about all artwork, talks about junk food, talks about social media consumption, how people on like Instagram are posting, living their best life. And it's, they rented out a house just to take the picture, to be in the house and stuff. But those are supernormal stimuli. And by seeing that, it gives you a much bigger endorphin rush and like a dopamine, drop than other sort of activities would. And you don't actually have to go and do these things. Like you actually can sort of vicariously get the dopamine boost by like enjoying someone else's imagery. And where this gets more interesting to me is that they can reproduce this. Again, that definition is triggers an animal's response, not just a human. You don't have to have higher order thinking. So there's one example where they took these fake eggs that were way bigger than a normal bird's egg would be, way more saturated, and they covered it in these black polka dots. Like it looked like a cartoon egg, literally. And they were able to place these eggs next to the nests of songbirds, and the songbirds would abandon their own eggs and let their own eggs die. And they kept trying to sit on these bigger comical, bright blue, black polka dotted eggs. And they would keep like they would make them so they would be so awkward to sit on, and the bird couldn't actually just like sit there, and it would have to keep falling off and roll over. And they would just constantly do that and let their eggs perish. And there was another example of butterflies where this grayback butterfly, if they just found two pieces of cardboard and they knew how to flutter it in just the right, like seductive way, as the report studied claimed, that would also make it so all of the male butterflies would ignore the real female butterflies, and they'd all try to mate with these pieces of cardboard just because the fluttering was like more seductive than the female butterfly fluttering. But these are all examples of supernormal stimulus, which is what Jessica Rabbit like actually represents in this movie, is this supernormal stimulus.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thought, and I was going to say hentai Japan for that, but yeah, I mean, you really can get those pillows that the lap pillows, as a not a pillow that goes in your lap, but a pillow shaped like a woman's melt
How many do
melt
you have to
reason.
get until they start giving you volume discounts? Do you know?
Naki
Four,
Harbor. I don't
eight?
know. I don't know how it runs in Naki Harbor. So, but yeah, that's the sort of thing. Idol culture is just, again, idol is in the name. Idol culture for J-pop and especially K-pop is pretty much off the charts. Like we have these hyper normal people as the idols, right?
Right.
And
Like
the
larger than life.
the companies they're working for, exploiting them, basically is, like these people can't seem human. Like a lot of the J-pop girl groups, like they're not even supposed to like date or anything while they're part of the group. So it's like, you have to be
Yeah,
this
they got to
unattainable
keep
ideal.
their essence. You know what I mean? Can't be leaking out.
Right. So we get controversies like, oh, this J-pop idol just got engaged suddenly and everyone's pissed. Or what else do we got? Yeah, someone kind of Britneyed and just got a really close cropped haircut, and that was like an issue. So The most fun is was the boy band SMAP. This is about 15 years ago, and one of the members of SMAP, very wholesome looking
What word are
J-pop.
you saying?
SMAP,
Smap?
SMAP,
Smap? SMA?
SMAP,
Smap.
SMAP.
Okay.
So anyway, one
It
of the
sounds like a bad word. It sounds something like your grandma would slap you if you said that.
yeah, yeah, but she'd SMAP you, yes.
Yeah.
And you know it's the Japan Inc. thing where I think all these guys still appear as actors even though the group's no longer functioning. But somewhere around 2008, one of them got naked and ran through the park, and it just became down like all over Japanese news. And the most absurd news piece I've ever seen was where someone had built a scale model of this park and the building surrounding it, physical model in the studio, and they're going over like, oh, here he did this, here he did this, and you're talking about like a singer that just ran around naked for a few minutes, and this is a week's worth of news. So
Here's a reenactment.
yeah, really. So, but the fact that they had built this model and everything, like, this doesn't matter. I mean, I guess the model is what you're talking about in a way.
It
Everyone's
does matter
focused on this
though.
stupid thing so much,
It
uh,
does matter because that turns into a meme that now, like, now I'm learning about it for the first time, and now that's occupying space in my brain, right?
now you
Thank
got
you
to
for
think
that,
about
by the
SMAP
way.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, I guess we can move on from that one if you. I don't know how many of those you have, but
Yeah, there was that aspect of the and again, that guy's name was Nicholas Tinnenbergen, if anyone's interested, and that was the 1973 Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine alongside Karl von Frisch and Konrad Lorenz. But anyway, that one really does blow my mind because they can repeat it consistently with all types of specific animals. Like if you just find the right cheat code for the right animal, you can trick them into basically eliminating themselves, which is kind of MK Ultra-ish. I mean, it feels like that's kind of in that same little area. And also I since Japan came up, the fisherman's wife is an example of something that happened was that like 1800s or something, like at least it was way before Roger Rabbit or any of these other kind of like pinup cartoons. And there was also a concept called a Tijuana Bible, which
oh
was a
yeah.
banned comic book that was kind of popular during like prohibition times, I think, and it was considered pornography, but it was really just cartoonists that were like to draw boobs and wrote about alcohol and drugs and violence and stuff. But that's a really cool topic, especially in the world of comic books, which is near and dear to my heart. But yeah, Tijuana Bibles are like the OG underground comic scene. Have you ever
Um,
seen a Tijuana Bible of any kind?
I
It's an umbrella term for any comic that was like naughty from
I know
that
I've
time
looked at
period.
a few like internet, articles just like showing stuff. Have I had an actual Tijuana Bible in my hand? No,
Or
but
I mean, you can look them up online and find like a
yeah, I've seen them
PDF and read
online.
through them and stuff. Yeah.
No, I have in my note in here. I wonder how many Rule 34 results you get for Jessica, more or less than Betty Boop. That's the chaser question. The first one, obviously. The second one, have you seen Betty Boop's vintage cartoons, like her black and white cartoons?
Absolutely. In fact,
Yeah.
man, I want to just suggest, I mean, at one point,
I'll be
hopefully
glad when
we
you're
run
dead we
out of
rascal you.
Disney. Well, hopefully we run out of Disney movies and we can go and do some more animated movies that are maybe outside the realm of just the mouse. But that's my all-time favorite cartoon, I think, is the Betty Boop Snow White or the Seven Dwarves, Sleeping Beauty and Seven Dwarves, I think.
That has a jet. Is
Because
that got Louis Armstrong or Cab Calloway in
yeah,
it?
that's
Okay, I
yeah,
need
that's the
them in it
one.
to
Yeah, yeah,
really
yeah.
make it work. I know I've seen it. I just yeah, I've
That's the one with like, man, I can't remember his name. It's like not Bozo the clown, but it's like the ghost clown doing the little dance.
yeah, yeah,
And that's a
yeah, yeah.
Callaway.
Anyway, so I was much more excited when Betty Boop showed up watching it this time because it's been a good 20 years since I watched this movie.
She's
I guess
very
I
problematic at this point.
yeah, I watched. Oh yeah, it is. But I watched it so much because this is one of the first affordable VHSs, I believe, that like mass market VHS in 1989, because that's still when rentals cost like not rentals, movies cost like $100 with the idea that people would be renting them and making their money back.
Hmm.
But this had it was like $20 or something. So we got the
Yeah,
VHS.
I remember that. It was that, and it was like Woody Woodpecker, and like there was a whole bunch of like really classics that you could go and rent easily. And Betty Boop was one of the, and ironically Popeye, which is kind of weird that they got Betty Boop but they didn't get Popeye.
Yeah, but the whole point is, Roger Rabbit, because you could just own it for relatively cheap. Yeah, I watched it like literally 100 times somewhere around 1990, and and that, I it's one of those things. It's right, like in Ghostbusters or Back to the Future, and we just did Return of the Jedi for a podcast, and all of us like, well, we don't really have to watch it again. We did. I think one guy just jumped to certain scenes, but it's like you can talk about this movie without watching it. It's fine, but it was fun watching this one after such a long time. So I also had fun last weekend because my daughter doesn't know who Roger Rabbit is. So I showed her a picture of Roger Rabbit and had her guess what Jessica Rabbit looks like. And that was fun.
Jessica Rabbit also, I would assume problematic, but yeah, she's like embedded as one of the all-time like cartoon hotties, right? Along with who's the Lola Bunny, I think, from Space Jam, and the princess from Dragon's Lair,
and
Sophia. I can't remember her name. Daphne.
and what was in the Heathcliff cartoon? It was the Junkyard Gang, and one of them has like a ridiculous cat girlfriend or something, which when you look at it as an adult, you're like, ooh, that's not right. Do you know what I'm talking about? Riff
I
Raff's
don't.
girlfriend.
I know who Heathcliff is, but I don't remember the voluptuous uh feline cartoon
It's it's
lady that
it's
you're talking about.
Riff Raff's girlfriend on Heathcliff, and
Yeah, Riff Raff's girlfriend was hot.
yeah, I want to say the name was Arlene, but that's Garfield's girlfriend, so that's wrong. Arlene not being a particularly hot cat.
It's such a weird concept about being attracted to a cartoon. It's I don't know. It's weird. It's again, it's like a cheat code.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of bringing up the Heathcliff one, just because it's like that seems wrong for Saturday morning television.
And what else? I had another note here, a little bit more of a vague one, but the interaction between alcohol and Roger Rabbit, I feel like there might be something to that because Roger Rabbit already exists in this. I can only imagine a reality if anything's possible and your body is malleable and you can bounce around and act any way you want. There's really no like a concept of inebriation or being intoxicated or being, in this like other dimension because they're always in that other dimension. So alcohol has this really unique effect on Roger, and I don't know about other cartoon characters in general, but he literally blows off steam. He turns into this big, I guess, like steam whistle and blows this steam out and like wrecks the whole area around him. But it feels like that's almost like this nuclear reaction, like they're taking this substance from the mundane world, which if you think about it, alcohol is one of our most coveted substances. Like if like the oldest, Egyptian sites, they found beer mills, and it's kind of always, it's even like saved our lives a few times through, international pandemics and stuff. But the alcohol interacting with this cartoon world feels like another example of like, here's how something can break, or here's how you can almost tear like a rift in the rules of this world. So I
Well,
kind of
that's
want to revisit the world and make everyone get drunk and see what happens.
what's like in Toon World. None of the Toons can die unless it's funny. I guess they could die if but the dip is a different substance, not from Toonland. We see two deaths with at least two. I guess the weasels get it too, don't they? But
All of them, yeah.
the shoe,
They turn into ghosts, and the shoe
yeah,
doesn't turn into a ghost,
right. The
which also
shoe
is like,
is a
what's that
truly
rule?
disturbing death. And Judge Doom, even though he's, as villainous as possible, it's a very disturbing death, right?
And that shoe also, I believe, was Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Bart Simpson.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
But
the shoe that gets killed.
yeah, and that, the dip is like what I feel like there's got to be some kind of alchemical, metaphor for the dip, just as this one thing that can destroy the undestroyable.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the inversion of the Philosopher's Stone. Like instead of reaching enlightenment, this actually destroys another reality. This sends you more into, I guess, an ignorant world where there's less dimensions to it.
Maybe, yeah, because yeah, I
But
guess
also, that
the
was
weasels get
the
ghosts because it's funny. The weasels are still trying. They can't laugh, but there's that's the thing. They die laughing, right? They don't die from dip, so it's a
right.
little.
They kill themselves laughing, which Again, the ending is where it stretches a little bit, but it's like you're already at the end, so there's
Well,
not a
they
lot to
die when
complain
it's
about.
funny, right? They die when it's funny. So
Do they? Is that the funniest scene? Is
it's not
is
the funniest
hearing
scene,
Bob
but
Hoskins dance and tell bad jokes? Is that really the funniest scene? I don't think it is.
it's not the funniest scene. But I mean, in that case, they have to do the thing that is funny, and that is dying and turning into ghosts. So um being funny doesn't necessarily mean you're being the funniest, right? So
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so.
the that is amusing. I didn't even realize this until I was looking at the stuff this morning. I'm like, man, when Bob Hoskins did this, he was only like 1 year older than me. That blew my mind.
I looked that up too. Yeah. It
Because
wasn't just, it's not one, but it was like, man, this guy's only like 4 years older than me. Yeah.
it still feels like he's like 20 years older than me watching this,
Yeah. No,
But
he feels like that was funny because watching this movie, it's like I feel like a kid watching an adult still, even though we're the same age. It's a very surreal thing to go through.
that also might come from watching this way so many times when I was, like 10 years old or whatever. So um does make sense a bit. I,
And we were talking about the portable hole. Another interesting note on that is the guy that invents it, based on the name on the box, is Calvin Q Calculus, which I think is a direct reference to Q, from, like 007 style stories. But even Q was itself a reference to Stanley P. Lavelle, who worked for the CIA and made all of these wacky contraptions. Like he had napalm bats were one of them, and he would strap like bombs on a dolphins and like all kinds of weird, like true mad scientist kind of things. This was a real person that was really making these suggestions. One of them was called the Aunt Jemima bomb, which I think they actually used pancake mix as part of like an explosive. It was a different time, but that's just an interesting correlation between Stanley P. Lavelle and then Q and then Calvin Q Calculus. Again, this military intelligence cartoon crossover that keeps rearing its head that we're seeing in the series, I think.
yeah. Okay, all I noticed as watching this now as a kid is that Eddie's got a Maltese Falcon in his place. So I would not have
Nice.
noticed that when I was a
Another
kid, but now
CIA reference.
yeah, he hangs his hat on it. So yeah, I was wondering what I. Oh yeah. Getting back to shaving a haircut, the note I didn't say is shaving a haircut in that CIA handbook you've been mentioning. If you ever capture a tune, you use that. I guess I don't know.
That could be their reality check.
I
Like
guess
if you
my
do the
last.
shaving, a haircut, which is also feels like a cop knock. I know I watch a lot of live PD and they do the thing, the dut 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 dut, and then they'll wait. It's
Until
or
you
like
two
the
bit it.
friendly knock.
Yeah, maybe. I just got two final thoughts. One is this the last time anybody saw Droopy, who's running the elevator? I feel like Droopy has never shown up again after this, so
I
maybe
love
for a few
Droopy.
years. I do
Well,
too.
Mitch
That's why.
Mitch McConnell took that role, I think.
Okay, so Mitch McConnell is now Droopy. Got you.
He is now
Uh,
Droopy, yeah.
yeah, the other one was just I was wondering, and is this the first time a major production had gone this retro animation for the first several minutes of the film, where they're completely trying to make it look like something that had been animated 30 years earlier? Because like we talked, Black Cauldron, all these movies kind of like are pushing the ball, and this one is the first one to be like, yeah, let's make it look like the old stuff, and not as in like Sleeping Beauty old stuff, as in the old like boilerplate stuff.
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like there's no other way they could have done it successfully with this cast. Because then what are you going to do? You're going to bring a bunch of timeless characters into a new format, while also having it pay homage to them. I mean, they did it with the new Space Jam, and I don't think it was very successful. So I don't know. Hopefully this was during a period when Disney as a company was still making good decisions, artistically.
Yeah, I know I haven't seen too much of it. I have heard that in the newer Mickey Mouse shorts that Mickey Mouse is insane again, so that's kind of nice.
And this also was a cool movie because at the beginning they show, I don't know the names for them, but there's like the evil devil Daffy or Devil Donald, and there's like Wacky Daffy, I think what they're called, which are like their alternate egos, right? They're their MK Ultra alters that get switched on and off with certain triggers. And those are kind of like rarities to see those guys in there. So I thought that was like a really cool nod to see those ones.
I mean, this might be the first time Mickey wasn't completely milk toast in 50 years. I was listening to some people and they were talking about just from an artistic perspective, but then you start thinking about it as like a entity thing where they're like Mickey when he started was horrible and interesting and crazy. And then they took this part of Mickey and made Donald Duck out of that. They took this part,
Mm-hmm.
made other characters. And by the late 30s, Mickey's not interesting anymore because they've given all of his interesting character aspects to other characters that Mickey can no longer have because he has to interact with them, which I thought was an interesting theory to because people were like, why is Mickey Mouse so bland? You know, and maybe that's why, because all the other characters you like have parts of him. But when you watch those really early shorts, Mickey's completely insane.
Yeah, it's like maybe a strained analogy. It's like Wu-Tang. Like the first few albums as a group were just insane and new and groundbreaking, and then it kind of dispersed, and like what made those albums so unique, everyone went out and did their solo things and got it out of their system, and then when they try to come back together, it's a little bit more like modern Mickey versus classic Mickey.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think I've hit all of my notes. So if you got any other thoughts you want to throw at this
A
one,
couple
now's
others.
the
I just
time.
had a silly note that Benny the Cab establishes another cartoon role, and he's like, "If you ever need me, just stick out your thumb." And I was like, "Is that where this mechanic for Grand Theft Auto like first got thought up? It was actually here in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where it's like, oh, if I need to go anywhere, just stick your thumb out, and a car just pulls up next to you." Um, there was this meta thing too, where Roger Rabbit goes into a movie theater when they're hiding out and they're watching a Goofy, like an old Goofy clip that they would play before news clips, and he makes this note and he's like, "Oh man, another stupid news rule. I hate the news." And I feel like this was extra meta because during the time period that this movie takes place, they would show cartoons before the newsreels. So that was always like the intro into it. But now you've got a cartoon character going into a theater, seeing the pre-roll, and then seeing the news that comes after it, which normally they wouldn't see because they were in the movie and not watching the movie. And then having them comment on the news. But that news clip is actually the big aha moment that Valiant has, because it's where they're going like, oh, the Maroon Cartoon Network, the biggest real estate deal in California history. And he was like, that's it. That's what they're trying to do. And that's when he realizes about the red line and about them trying to buy up all the real estate, because ultimately the plot point of this movie, spoiler alert, I guess, I don't think it ruins it anyway, but that Judge Doom wants to buy all the real estate of Toontown and then just decimate it with this dip, this like green chemical that's a mixture of like turpentine and acetone and benzidine or something, and it just washes all the cartoons away and it gets rid of it. And then he's going to put a freeway in place of Toontown, which also begs this like really interesting aspect of maybe it did used to be a Toontown in reality, and they really did replace it with the LA freeway, and we would never really know, right?
This is a
Because it happened.
documentary.
Yeah, maybe this is a documentary on some aspect.
I'm from the
And
hometown,
then
but I never made it to the world of Sidamari Croft, did I? It turned into CNN Center, and CNN lives there.
and what else? Oh, so this one was also a random tangent that I went on, but right before Eddie goes into Toontown, there's this transition. Like before he's ready to fully embrace the entire Toon world, he breaks open this old gun case that he's got, and inside the gun case is a cartoon gun with a bunch of cartoon bullets. So it shows you like, okay, he's about to interact with the cartoon world on like some of his terms, which happens to be this gun, before he jumps fully in. But these guns that he breaks out, they're called dum dums. And if you look into, I was just like, why did they call them dum dums? Because obviously it's a joke because they're in a cartoon, and like dum dum as in dummy dummy. But the dum dum bullets, it's actually named after the dum dum arsenal, and the dum dum arsenal outside of these dum dum bullets, which they got their name from, they also were famous because during the Indian Rebellion of 1857, they were coating they were fighting Muslims and coating the bullets in the grease of like pig fat, and then telling the people that they were firing at, like, hey, these are going to send you straight to, another realm that you don't want to go to because you're now going to be considered unclean. They were actually using, pig's blood on the bullets to turn it not just into like you're going to die, but now you're also going to go to hell on top of that. And they actually had to like change all these rules. Like there was a huge revolt against it, but it was extremely efficient apparently. And it just reminded me, again, that's where the word dum dums comes from. Like this is the history of the dum dum bullets. And I guess Roosevelt also was part of some of these old stories. And it reminded me of, there was like news stories recently in the US, something called G-Hog bullets, where they would put like a little bits of paint on the very tips, but the paint was mixed with like pig's blood or something. So I don't know. I thought that it was a weird tangent of something that I never would have learned about without this movie.
I'm just like, hey, if someone shoots you, it's their fault, not yours.
Well, I mean, I guess technically, based on like the Quran, it doesn't really count. Like if you get shot by a bullet that's got pig blood on it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make it any more special than any other bullet would have. So it really was just an outrage sort of thing that someone, made a profit and made a product off of, which is just the best part of capitalism. But yeah, anyways, to rewind that back, it all came from, where did dum dum bullets came from? Why are they called dum dum bullets?
Don't we have the lollipops too? I thought we were going to get a lollipop story, and we got something
The
much
lollipop
darker.
story. Oh, from the Dum Dum Company.
Yeah, so that's where my head first went. So
Who was the one that had the Salvador Dali logo? Chupa
Chupa
lollipops.
Chips, that's right. Yeah,
Chupa chips.
there's a Chupa Chips. I don't know, you can barely read it. There's one at the mall nearby, and when my daughter was like 2 or 3 years old, she would like just stare at it, and it's like singing this weird song. So we never bought the lollipops because nobody wanted the lollipop. But yeah,
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 yeah.
it is a weird logo. You do trip out looking at that logo. So for sure. Um,
Let's see. I mean, I had a bunch of other notes, but we kind of covered the freeway conspiracy stuff. Oh, and there's a lot of correlations too between Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Chinatown. And in Chinatown, they have a similar conspiracy, but it has to do with the water supply and not the public transport. But there's also a scene in Chinatown where they're going back through some old photos, like voyeuristic, private investigator photos, and that scene reflects very much the scene in Roger Rabbit when they're showing the patty cake photos, and also the car that Jessica Rabbit sits in and drives resembles the car from the Chinatown movies. So there was clearly some like tongue in cheek and some kind of like homage being paid, I think, to some of that.
oh yeah, for sure. I think I would. My last note is it's only China after all. So it's my final note there. I guess the one thing is we're mentioning, the conspiracy of getting rid of Toontown, building the freeways, but that was a major issue in 1940s and 1950s America as they built the entire interstate system that went through cities. And when you have to take out a neighborhood, guess which neighborhood's getting taken out? The more vulnerable ones, or
Toontown.
yeah, or neighborhoods being split in two, where you had like maybe a cohesive community of a lot of these were African American communities, and they're like, freeway straight through the middle of your town, so not the other parts of town.
Well, and it was advantageous to so many different people, not just for like, let's get this community out of this area that we don't want them in, but another aspect was very much a real conspiracy where the oil companies and the public transport companies really were buying up railways and really were just letting them deteriorate and not maintain them, and then making the argument of, oh, this is just this old dilapidated technology, it can't compete with all the modern stuff. And instead of doing high speed railways like you basically have in other countries, like, we're just going to go all in on this, personal transportation thing. And that was a very real aspect of this. Like, oil companies really did buy up railroad companies and then put more of their focus into fossil fuels and automobile companies, and not so much into the railways.
Yeah, because here, I mean, I can get pretty much anywhere by train if I'm willing to pay for it. I could take the highways. I don't take the highways very often. They're not freeways. You got to pay for them, but they tend to go around the cities, which can be annoying. But again, that way you don't have to go straight through the city. Um, the most Tokyo has its notorious not well, it has its free expressway system, excuse me, not freeway. But yeah, that's been used in movies to show space travel, like and Solaris. I think Koyaanisqatsi has a bunch of Tokyo highway sequences because it's so trippy. But yeah, there they did kind of have to go through the city itself, which is when you think about it now, I mean, think about the city you live in. If they're suddenly like, we're going to build a massive highway through here, it's going to really throw a wrench in things.
Well, they just did that in Orlando, yeah.
Yeah, okay,
But
then
they're always doing that in Orlando.
Okay. Let's pull in for today then. Do you want to talk about what's going on in your world as of pretty much now?
I do, and also I just want to mention that kid's name that got hurt on that Disney ride in Disneyland on the Roger Rabbit ride. His name was Brandon Zucker, and he was
What
4 years old at the
Yow.
time.
When did that happen?
It happened in, I didn't put the date down. It was in the 90s, I think. It
Okay.
was in like 98 or 99 or something.
Okay, just curious about that. Okay. Hell of a way to start your plug, but
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely want to shout out if any of that was interesting. I've got this Time Samplers 3 issue, and this Time Samplers is based on the Wake Initiated Lucid Dreams. There's Disney references inside of this. There's like the MK Ultra mind control. This particular issue 3, is the one that breaks down Project Monarch in illustrated detail. So this is like one of my favorite books out of all of those. And yeah, there's all sorts of inside references to the animation industry. And the other really big one is the Homunculus Owner's Manual that just came out recently, that I put out with my friend Juan from the One on One podcast. And this has got 33 pages, over 70 unique illustrations, and it breaks down the history of what a homunculus is, how to create them, different cultures, different alchemical grimoires that mention them, all of the rumored magical abilities that you can get from creating them. And it's really a unique thing, because not a lot of people have, let alone looked into all the research and compiled it together, but then come up with illustrations to kind of like visually show all these really weird aspects of how to make a homunculus. It gets really kind of weird and creepy. And I guess the last plug is my own personal YouTube channel now, Paranoid American, where I've got some interviews that'll be coming out. I'll probably have you on there at some point pretty soon. And then I've also got a website now called occultdecode.com, which it has right now a gematria calculator, and it also has a banned word list, because some of the videos I've been trying to put on my YouTube, they get flagged. So I'm having to find creative words to replace the words that I want to say. One of those examples is a substance that's derived from adrenaline, which decomposes and turns into another substance. But if you say the word out loud or put it on the screen, you get your wrist slapped by YouTube and Alphabet and everyone else. So the substitute for that word is thrill oxide. So if you went to occultdecode.com, you can either type in thrill oxide, or you can type in ADREN so and so and so. And if you just type in the first few letters, you'll see here's the word that you want to say, and here's the word you can say in place of it. And it even blurs the words out for you if you turn on the safe screen option. So if you're like live streaming and you want to figure out like, how do I say, beep, or how do I say beep? We've got the actual substitutes for you. The other day it came in really handy. Someone wanted to say like, oh, the thing that police have, and it fires things out. I didn't want to say the thing because it was like in a sketchy area, and I was like, yeah, it's a super soaker. And it's like, okay, now that makes sense. Yeah, so the cop aimed his super soaker at the bad guy and he splashed him, and now all of a sudden you're allowed to say these words and it's advertiser friendly. So yeah, occultdecode.com, it's going to turn into like a really cool, I guess, like decoder ring for naughty words. That's my hope.
As for us, it's a Occult Disney podcast. Actually, your YouTube page at Paranoid American is probably not a bad way to drop us a note or something if you want to.
And talking about getting slapped on the wrist, I also bought occultdisney.com. It just redirects to our playlist in case someone thinks that that domain's legit. It's not. You're not allowed to own a domain that has the word disney.com in it. But I just wanted to make sure if you accidentally were to think that you could go to occultdisney.com, that it actually does redirect you to our YouTube playlist. So occultdisney.com is definitely not a website that should exist, but if you go to it, it might redirect you. And I also grabbed occultanimation.com in case something happens to occultdisney.com.
Right, right. Um, as for a moment, we're also still on Twitter or whatever it's called. I don't know. I get mostly theme park notices for that account, so that's kind of exciting, I guess.
You're in the algorithm.
That's right. And I do a lot of podcasts, which you could support on Patreon at Podcastio Podcastius. I also talk about what's supposed to be really good movies and what are supposed to be really bad movies at Films and Filth, The Twilight Zone, and other shows of that nature at Time Enough Podcast. And there's some video game stuff. Luke loves Pokemon for the Pokemon lover. Hyrule Field Report for those into Zelda, and the Game Show where gamers game each other. Woo! Okay, off to Toontown then. Record.